That war had been grinding on for 3 years while America sought to remain neutral. President Woodrow Wilson had been re-elected in large measure because he had kept America out of the war. But Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare pushed Wilson and the nation too far. But although America had a small standing army, the overall population was only 90 million strong, larger than Britain and France combined. In May 1917, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, and the Army grew quickly. The U.S. Armed Forces sent to Europe to support Britain and France were named the American Expeditionary Force, or AEF, under the command of General John J. Black Jack Pershing. At that time, Pershing had already had an extraordinary career. He fought with the Buffalo Soldiers of the 10th Cavalry Regiment at San Juan Hill in the Spanish-American War, and was personally promoted to Brigadier General by President Theodore Roosevelt in 1905, skipping 3 ranks and over 800 senior officers. His effort to capture Pancho Villa was unsuccessful, but in the process, he pioneered the use of truck convoys to deliver supplies. In 1917, he was made a full general by President Wilson and put in charge of organizing, training, and supplying the rapidly expanding AEF. During World War I, Pershing would serve as a mentor to the great generals of the Second World War. Men like then Colonel George C. Marshall, one of Pershing's top assistants. Marshall was a key designer of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, a massive joint AEF French Fourth Army operation that helped bring the war to an end. This was part of a grand offensive beginning in the late summer 1918 to smash through the Hindenburg Line, a vast network of German defenses in northeastern France. The German High Command believed the Hindenburg Line could not be broken. It included trenches, concrete bunkers, and heavy belts of barbed wire, tunnels for troop movement, and all were anchored by machine gun emplacements. The machine gun defined the terrifying, bloody, and wasteful experience of World War I. The Americans had gotten the ball rolling on machine guns with the Gatling gun, used near the end of the Civil War. But although this was the first continuous firing gun, it was not truly an automatic weapon, as it required a person to turn a crank to load the cartridges. That changed with the 1884 invention by Hiram Maxim, an American-born British inventor. The Maxim gun was originally used by British forces during colonial wars in Rhodesia, South Africa, and Nigeria. Armies were initially slow to adopt machine guns due to their tendency to jam. American forces continued to rely on the Gatling gun until finally abandoning it in 1911. But gradually, the armies of Europe and the American Navy began incorporating the machine gun into their forces. During World War I, the American forces primarily had to use machine guns provided by their French allies. But late in the war, a small number of heavy machine guns designed by the legendary firearms genius John Moseph Browning made it to the front. Browning was one of the most highly regarded gunsmiths of the 20th or any other century, and designed a number of reliable, effective arms used by the U.S. during the war. The M1917 Browning machine gun was only issued to the last units shipping out to Europe, but it would prove its worth in World Wars I and II, and continue to be used in Korea and Vietnam. The M1917 was a heavy machine gun, firing 450 .30-06 cartridges per minute. Browning also made a light machine gun, the M1918 Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR. Although, like the heavy M1917, it would see only limited use in World War I. the BAR would eventually become the backbone of U.S. forces in World War II and Korea. Weighing about 16 pounds, the BAR brought automatic firepower to the squad level. The vast networks of trenches along the Western Front, anchored by death-dealing machine guns, led to the development of yet another tool of war, the armored tank. Back home, a Lieutenant Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower trained tank crews in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On the Western Front, the British, followed by the French, took the lead in developing tanks during the war. During the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, Colonel George Patton, another of Pershing's protégés, commanded American-crewed French Renault tanks. Tank support helped push back German forces at the Battle of Saint-Michel, but during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, 2 weeks later, poor roads rendered the tanks ineffective. One unit participating in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive was the newly organized 93rd Division. The 93rd was an all-black division. Organized in December 1917 at Camp Stewart, Virginia, the division included the 369th, 370th, 371st, and the 372nd Infantry Regiments. All 4 regiments were loaned to the French, who were in desperate need for troops to replace their losses. This was considered a temporary arrangement, but it lasted through the end of the conflict. The men of the 371st Regiment were draftees from South Carolina. They arrived on the Western Front in April 1918 and began training with the French. In the summer of that year, they served as part of the French Fourth Army and participated in the occupation of the Verdun sector. In September, the 371st moved with the rest of the French Fourth Army to take its role in the Allies' final major offensive. This was a joint operation with the American Expeditionary Force's First Army under Pershing. By its actions in this offensive, the 371st earned honors from both the French and American forces. The regiment as a whole was awarded the French Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre. 10 individual officers and a dozen enlisted men were also decorated with the American Distinguished Service Cross. And the grandson of a slave, Corporal Freddie Stowers, would show such valor that he would be awarded the Medal of Honor. In the early morning of September 28, 1918, what was to be the last day of his life, Corporal Freddie Stowers served as the squad leader of Company C as they prepared to take Hill 188 in the Champagne-Marne sector. Corporal Stowers' Medal of Honor citation describes what happened next. With extraordinary heroism and complete disregard of personal danger under devastating fire, he crawled forward, leading his squad toward an enemy machine gun nest, which was causing heavy casualties to his company. After fierce fighting, the machine gun position was destroyed and the enemy soldiers were killed. Displaying great courage and intrepidity, Corporal Stowers continued to press the attack against a determined enemy. While crawling forward and urging his men to continue the attack on a second trench line, he was gravely wounded by machine gun fire. Although Corporal Stowers was mortally wounded, he pressed forward, urging on the members of his squad until he died. Inspired by the heroism and display of bravery of Corporal Stowers, his company continued the attack against incredible odds, contributing to the capture of Hill 188 and causing heavy enemy casualties. The Argonne Offensive continued, and in the next phase, another American soldier would also demonstrate valor above and beyond the call of duty and be awarded the Medal of Honor. Like Stowers, this man was a corporal. The world remembers him better, however, by his later rank, Sergeant York. Alvin York wrote of his actions on October 8, 1918. As a memorial in the French village of Châtel-Chehery states, Armed with a rifle and pistol, he silenced a German battalion of 35 machine guns, killed 25 enemy soldiers, and captured 132. Stowers and York were both citizen soldiers who registered with the Selective Service and answered the call when America went to war. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive was a success. The Hindenburg Line was broken, and on November 11, 1918, the Germans signed an armistice agreeing to a ceasefire. The Treaty of Versailles would end the war in 1919, though in truth, the peace would turn out to be just a pause for the nation to raise another generation to put into uniform. In recognition for his service, General John J. Blackjack Pershing would be promoted to General of the Armies of the United States, the highest rank in the armed forces. The rank was created especially for Pershing, though in 1976, George Washington would be posthumously promoted to the same rank, but with over a century's seniority to Pershing, so that no one would ever be able to outrank the nation's first commander-in-chief. And as for the soldiers, as the Center for Military History writes, units overseas were brought back just as rapidly as shipping space could be found for them. When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, the U.S. Army had over 3.7 million men. Within 9 months, almost 90% were demobilized. By the end of 1919, active forces were reduced to fewer than 20,000 officers and a little over 200,000 enlisted.
If you're eager to see more of our historical documentaries, please like, share, and subscribe.